Hi, everyone. Welcome back from this nice snack break. We're going to begin the second panel. We're going to begin the second panel, and first, I would like to introduce our speakers. I think the way I will do it is I will read their bios in the order that the presenters will go in. So first, we'll have Professor Jake Effoduh, and Jake is, sorry, I have the full bio up here. And Jake Effoduh is an accomplished lawyer specializing in human rights, technology, and artificial intelligence. Jake is currently a Vanier Scholar and PhD candidate. Thank you. At Osgood Hall Law School, York University. He also serves as an assistant professor at Lincoln Alexander School of Law, Toronto Metropolitan University. Next, we'll have Daniel Siegel. He is an investigative analyst at Graphika, where his work focuses on tracking Gen AI abuse and misuse by extremist and state actors. He was previously a researcher at Columbia University, studying the use of artificial intelligence in influence operations. His influential work, featured in the New York Times, identified in the wild instances in which AI models are exploited to spread disinformation, target vulnerable audiences, and manipulate individuals. Siegel has previously shared his expertise with tech platforms and delivered key insights at international forums, including at The Hague. Dr. Ashley Mattheis is a postdoctoral researcher at the School of Law and Government at Dublin City University. Her work brings together cultural studies, media studies, and visual rhetorical criticism through the lens of feminist theory to explore the rhetorical and persuasive force of extremist digital cultures, propaganda materials, gendered communicative approaches, and media circulation practices. The areas of inquiry include the digital culture of the manosphere, the far/alt-right, trad culture, and QAnon. She has published in the Routledge Handbook of Critical Studies in Whiteness, the International Center for Radicalization, and the Journal for De-Radicalization. So this panel will focus on AI and extremist use of AI. And just as an intro to the topic, according to a United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute report titled Algorithms and Terrorism, the global AI market will exceed 100 billion by 2025, and AI-enabled systems will continue to support many sectors ranging from healthcare to education, commerce, banking, and financial services, critical infrastructure, and security, among many others. There are clear benefits to AI, as per the quote from the report. However, as will be discussed on this panel, there clearly are malicious usage of AI technologies by bad actors, including violent extremists and terrorist groups. And these pose an ongoing threat, including, but not limited to, propaganda creation, guidance, using AI for guidance of a more instructional nature on how to conduct attacks, using AI to assist with the creation of deepfakes, whether they be audio, visual, or image-based, and the usage of machine translation to translate propaganda widely, and official propaganda releases from groups like IS, among many other misuses of AI. It's also important to consider how racism and sexism can be reproduced by AI systems themselves, which unfortunately further facilitate the production of white supremacist propaganda, for example. Clearly, there is a lot to think about, but with no further ado, I would like to present the panelists. And in the order that they will go in, it will first be Professor Jake Effoduh, then Daniel Siegel, and then Dr. Ashley Mattheis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just set my timer because I know we have just 12 minutes each to speak. I want to thank GNET for convening this very critical, very important conference. Like Meili just talked about, the $100 billion sector. I think when we talk about the use of AI in this field, it is one of the most critical considerations we have to make in our very time. In the last 3 years, we have seen a geometric progression on how the use of AI has enabled terrorism in different ways. So we've seen tons and tons of reports at the international legal space where extremist groups use AI systems or tools to disseminate propaganda. So in terms of like the use of deepfakes, both in audio and video format, including the use of games. to be able to spread misinformation, to be able to sort of decode criminality. We've seen this quite amplifying in the last 3 years. Also, we all know that there's so many automated bots on various social media platforms that amplify extremist narratives as well. And very critically is the use of AI in extremist recruitment. So we've seen more vulnerable individuals who are targeted by extremist actors who use AI tools to identify and communicate with these people. In fact, from the international space, we've realized that certain people are actually extremist recruiters without knowing that they are recruiters. So people are sometimes supporting or sometimes enabling such recruitment without even the knowledge that they're perpetrating such a crime. And so the use of these tools to communicate with individuals who are vulnerable. Some of these individuals are sometimes young youth, people who are in both the global majority and the global minority countries. And we see how the use of AI can help some of these extremist groups to negatively analyze social media behavior, rightfully or wrongfully, to target, to classify, and then to use some form of automated indoctrination. A lot of scholars and researchers have provided a lot of input in this area. But on the other side is how the use of AI could also help. So it's like I wouldn't call it a double-edged sword. It's more like your best dream and your worst nightmare coming to fruition. And I say this because we've seen the use of AI help the criminal justice sector across various countries to be able to counter extremist efforts, both online and offline. So, for example, the use of probabilistic genotyping through the use of AI systems or the use of AI tracking models that have helped us identify, arrest, track, trace certain extremist individuals, groups, and even shut down certain use of tools online is quite commendable. Of course, it's not immune from its flaws and problems. But I think it's important to point out that automated content moderation, of course, with its limitations as well, has sometimes helped in monitoring and detecting some of these extremist violent moves online. And I think we're seeing an increase in intelligence gathering from the use of like analyzing large data sets to identify current and potential terroristic activities, and sometimes even predict potential threats through like data analysis. So the use of hotspotting, for example, has helped us track some extremist activities. Again, just to mention that these tools are not without their problems, they're not without their limitations, they're not without the ways that they sort of amplify discrimination and bias. And I think most of us who work in this field know that. It's important to also recognize that this has brought about a lot of tension. So when we're seeing the value of using AI to counter extremist efforts versus people who use AI to amplify violent extremism online and offline, a lot of other tensions exist around this area. One of which is the dichotomy between if we should use a more ethical approach or a more legal approach to this. I know they're sometimes symbiotic, but ethical guidelines as a framework to tackle this issue is progressive, but it's also limited because of two things. One is ethics are criticized as toothless bulldogs. They don't have that enforcement teeth that a legal principle would have. So when ethical guidelines are not confirmed with, there's no enforcement is very, very limited or impossible, versus legal principles that provide strict guardrails and guidelines and have enforcement teeth, but they're also very slow and very, 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 very difficult for them to come to fruition. And I'll give a very important example here, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with the current UN treaty being negotiated at the UN to counter cybercrime, which, if adopted by the UN General Assembly, will be the first binding UN instrument for international cooperation to tackle and prevent and investigate cybercrime, also recognizing the use of AI for violent extremist efforts. And this would be literally a supranational framework that would govern both activities on the dark web, both tackling how fraudsters are fleecing from crime, but also how people who groom or recruit terroristic activities online would be dealt with from this like UN treaty. Unfortunately, after 5 years of negotiations, it is still ongoing. And in February 2024, a couple of months back, we could not conclude with an agreed draft. So meaning that we don't have any international law in this area. So various countries are unable to agree on the wording that would sort of balance human rights with safeguards and security concerns around violent extremist activities online. So these are some of the tensions I'm talking about. Also, there's also tension between domestic approaches versus regional or international approaches. So certain states are, some states recognize this as a more critical issue than others. Some states also are very finicky as to whether they would be complicit or implicit, on the other hand, around such an international framework. Of course, we'll be deceiving ourselves if we don't know that there are state government officials across various countries that are also funding and enabling extremist activities online, that are funding terroristic activities and groups. And so, of course, these same state officials are not going to be marrying this idea of a strict legal principle to tackle these problems. So there is a tension between whether we would use domestic approach or a more regional and international approach. The domestic one has enforcement teeth because it is enforceable. We have the machineries of the police, the military, the court system to be able to address it, versus the international, which is more soft law. It is more prescriptive than it is more enforcing, right? And of course, we also have the very big tension around security and privacy, which I just was designing a small course curriculum when I was trying to evaluate the balancing framework of protecting security versus privacy. So we know states are always like, we want to see everything you're doing online so that we can protect you from these extremists. We want to be able to deploy our tools. We want to see what everyone is doing at every time. We want to track and trace, including the use of like facial recognition technology. But we know that this raises a lot of privacy concerns because a lot of citizens are like, well, I'm not a terrorist. I'm not doing anything terroristic. Why should the state be seeing everything I'm doing online? And so it's difficult for this balance between surveillance and enforcing or protecting individual liberties. And I think the last would be around the risk of AI misuse by both state and non-state actors, as well as the risk of biased algorithms leading to false positive and negatives, which we've seen a lot of like false arrest, false targeting. In fact, there's a lot of AI poisoning, or what I would call data poisoning, where people who use AI for very terrible things get to use tools that deflect from them and implicate other people who are not necessarily doing the same. In conclusion, where do we go from here? There's been a lot of conversation, including from the first panel, around what we need to do. So I'm not going to restate this way much more, but I want to just emphasize the need for international solidarity, which is an international principle. It's not just some ideal of what we coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's more of it's a recognized international principle, which became quite apparent during COVID when we realized that we need international solidarity for us to tackle COVID-19. We have to share vaccines, we have to share information, we have to share knowledge. I think the same applies in this area because this is an international phenomenon and it has to be dealt with the need for solidarity and conjunction. The second would be let's adopt these ethical frameworks as a starting point and build upon it towards some legal enforcement. So the FASTA principles when it comes to fairness, accountability, safety, transparency, enforcement, and robustness when it comes to the use of AI tools, I think is very important. But that is a foundation. That is what we call the minimum core to build on legal approaches that we're going to take moving forward. I can't overemphasize the cybersecurity treaty. I think it's important for NGOs to lobby their government to ensure that this treaty gets signed. The more we keep waiting, the more we keep negotiating, we are seeing an increase and a proliferation of terroristic and violent extremist use of AI online and offline. I think AI impact assessments are very critical. People talk about robust internet governance. I'm not opposed to it. But I'm one of the academics who think we need a reformed structure for the internet governance structure that we currently have at the moment, right? It is not founded on principles that help us tackle this problem as we so speak. And I think the last point I will make would be the need for decolonial approaches to tackling violent extremism. Violent extremism, AI can do a whole lot, but sometimes AI is not going to be the solution towards this. Sometimes, the best AI is no AI, and we need to be able to marry both technological and non-technological approaches to tackle this problem. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the other conversations by my co-panelists, Daniel, Ashley, and thanks, Meili, for a great facilitation.
Thank you, Professor Effoduh, for your excellent overview of the importance of ethics and also the special emphasis on the need for tech-based approaches, but also connected with non-tech approaches as well. That's a really important point to emphasize, and the need for looking at extremism and counter-extremism through a decolonial lens. Next, we'll move on to Daniel Siegel, and I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I get the clicker? Awesome. I might need some tech help as well with some of the content. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel. I recognize it is that time where people are starting to doze off or get tired because it's right before lunch. I'm hoping you can stay with me. I think some of the in the wild examples of the way generative AI is being used in the current threat landscape will wake everybody up, as well as just like, start putting some of the theoreticals and speculation as to what happens next with the technology and see some examples of how it's currently being used. Before I start out, quick trigger warning. I want to let everyone know that if anything makes you feel uncomfortable, feel free to put your head down, walk out of the room. If you do want to take pictures or video of the content, please make sure if you do share it, you are labeling it as, AI generated content. I find that when we're starting to have this conversation, it's necessary to discuss what is new and what is not new when we speculate about how generative AI alters the informational landscape. I like to start out by saying that lying and propaganda is not a new phenomenon. However, what is unique is how generative AI supercharges the already unstable informational environment, and I think it does so in three unique ways. The first being model accessibility. With generative AI, anyone can access an extremely powerful tool that can outsource creative skill and create more engaging content with just a couple of clicks. The second being customization. With generative AI, it allows for individuals to target particular demographics or specific subsets, making violent ideologies appealable to essentially anyone on command. And lastly, the information veracity that is possible now because of this technology is incredibly unique. You can generate hundreds, if not thousands, of content in just a single click, automating away to some extent troll farms because anyone can operate one just on their computer alone. Before I go into the presentation, next slide. I'm going to be covering the in the wild examples, how the technology is really impacting malicious operations today. So the first case study I'll be talking about is of a large language model being weaponized. If you're not familiar with what a large language model is, also referred to as an LLM, ChatGPT is a great example of this. It allows for users to interact with an intelligent text-based system and essentially complete any demand that you enter. Now, ChatGPT is something referred to as a closed source model, or one that you have to directly log into online in order to access. There are other types of models out there, including open source models, which is what I'm going to be discussing largely today. And in March of 2023, one of the largest tech companies' open source model was leaked onto 4chan before it even had access to the general public. And you can imagine what immediately happened next. Users who subscribe to neo-Nazi and accelerationist ideologies began downloading the model, stripping it away of the safeguards. What's unique with open source models is that you can easily strip away the safeguards, or more often, sometimes you can download them without the safeguards. And they often post a lot of screenshots of their chatbot creations. And I then narrowed down a couple examples of the type of chatbots that we have seen out there. The first being something I refer to as an unrestricted chatbot. These are able to provide users of instructions like how to target city infrastructure, create 3D printed guns, and even find ways to appeal their violent ideologies to particular ethnic and religious groups. This first kind of chatbot operates largely as a force multiplier, giving groups customized information, enabling them to operate more effectively in info space, and also sometimes in the real world. The second type of chatbot I generally refer to as a trope bot. And there's been screenshots of this type of stuff posted all over 4chan. And there are also several closed source models available to operate as trope bots. These are chatbots capable of mimicking targets of violence. An example of this is a chatbot that's often used, nicknamed Trinity. That's an African American that complains about welfare and often speaks in broken English. What's unique about this particular type of bot is it's easy to imagine how it can be deployed on social media sites or even chat rooms to mainstream networks to push people further into their echo chambers and warp individual realities without people even knowing that there's a chatbot on the other side of the screen, thinking the entire time that it's just a person. And this isn't exactly like recruiting them, right? That's one aspect of it. But just like thinking there are people who fit this stereotype as to what you think is true about the world is particularly worrisome when that can be done at scale. The next type of chatbot is the one I'm most worried about, are referred to as smut bots. These are chatbots capable of giving individuals their personalized forum. I've seen several examples of this in the wild. Chatbots capable of creating long stories of Nazis committing sexual assault, as well as the use of chatbots generating stories of creatures being put into microwaves or blenders. Why is this particularly worrisome? Is it can be used to inspire or gamify the planning of particular types of attacks. And what's also worrisome is because it's an open source model, you don't log in or go onto any particular website, it's accessible directly on your laptop. So we already struggle around the world with regulating things like pirated movies and video games. It's very easy to imagine how this parallels that threat in terms of regulation, but the dangers of it, I think, are particularly higher, which is why I think open source, we need to have conversations as to how to prevent these types of threats from manifesting, because it's not going away. What's unique about all of this too, especially when we're talking about trope bots and the smut bots, is processes of radicalization in the past have been largely unidirectional. With the ability to engage in a chatbot, it becomes a bimodal process. And the emergence of LLMs means that non-existent personas can serve as a tool to further radicalize individuals, push them further down their echo chambers. The second case study I'll be talking about.
Chooses when it wants to.
You're good. The second case study I'll be talking about is a memetic campaign that was carried out by Hamas affiliates. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict represents one of the first ever wars where this technology is really being deployed by a terrorist organization on the battlefield. And this case study explores how a variety of Hamas affiliates were using generative AI to propagate the narrative that the Israeli Defense Forces wears diapers. This narrative actually has origins with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, or the IRGC. And in November of 2017, late Qasem Soleimani made claims that American troops urinate themselves out of fear on the battlefield, thus that the United States mandates diapers. In December of last year, this narrative was adapted and shared by Abu Obaida, the spokesperson of Hamas, saying that Israeli soldiers are the only military in the world that wears diapers, specifically Pampers. At first, this may just seem like a Trumpian comment, and immediately after Obeida's live stream, the internet was bombarded with thousands of images of Israeli soldiers, generative AI images of them wearing diapers. It was posted on a variety of platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and a lot of the content garnered hundreds of thousands of views. Sometimes this content even included deepfakes, like a clip that I'm about to show of Daniel Hogarty, who is the spokesperson for the IDF in a voice clone. If you could just click that video.
We are fighting spooky ghosts, and as you know, spooky ghosts make you poop your pants sometimes. So combined with the diarrhea.
Now, what is unique is these accounts, not necessarily Hamas affiliated, right? But the comments that were coming from a Hamas militant then being memified and pushed out. And uniquely, textually, this lie might not be able to catch on, but the memification that's empowered by generative AI, it gained so much traction that news accounts from BBC to CNN to others, when posting war updates, would often have their comments section filled with just diaper emojis, sometimes gaining thousands of likes, creating a new form of inside joke. But what's the significance of this, really? Well, oftentimes our conversations around generative AI focus on this imagined future where people can't tell fact from fiction because of the flurry of realistic content. What's unique about all of this content is it's clearly AI generated, yet AI still enabled the spread of this content. Something I've referred to as the synthetic narrative amplification phenomenon, where essentially with the help of generative AI, extremists like Hamas can supercharge textual lies with entertaining, seemingly benign visual content at scale. It aids in the virality of extremist messaging and can also help evade content moderators as well, just because of the cartoonish nature. This also applies to many of the memes that you've seen previously, the generative AI ones of like Pixar Hitlerish figures. So instead of fostering a weaponized unreality like so many people are concerned about, synthetic images can, even unmistakably synthetic, right? Clearly synthetic images can bolster the ability for these groups to spread their talking points on mainstream platforms. The next case study I'll be talking about is similar, but it's of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State affiliates using voice cloning technology in order to broaden appeal and even evade content moderators. Now, over the past few months, there's been a rapid rise of content featuring cartoon characters and YouTubers singing popular Al-Qaeda and Islamic State extremist nasheeds. Audio deepfakes featuring characters like Rick from Rick and Morty, Peter Griffin, Mr. Beast, PewDiePie, a variety of others, often singing in Arabic, advocating for violence. And what's unique about a lot of these cases is actually a lot of their accounts, prominently on TikTok, would have links directly to Telegram groups that were official, IS and Al-Qaeda, like Telegram networks. That being said, right, you don't know whether they're just participants in there or they're making themselves seem more real, but very often the profile pics of a lot of the people posting this content would feature Jihadi John. So I'm going to show you an example of Rick from Rick and Morty singing one of these. So you can see how they use a lot of imagery and videos directly from the show itself. There's also been prominent in using the technology for dubbing, particularly in a variety of networks. These two videos were pushed. The first one is a bomb-making guide that uses an AI voice to show the creation of a bomb. And I ask you to play that for like 5 seconds, just we're running out of time.
Cover 8. These are 2 drip pipes of 1 centimeter each filled with the detonator.
And then also adapting it to different languages. Click the second video if you could.
С этим человеком связаны все надежды,
You can see they
все
can
молитвы,
target Russian
все мужество
audiences,
жителей
which,
Святой Земли.
at first might seem kind of benign, but just the use of dubbing in this way enables them to spend significantly less capital. You can also see that they've been using it to reanimate particular terrorists as well. So here's an audio clip of Omar Mateen that was circulated on YouTube.
Hello, my name is Omar Mateen, and I slaughtered 49 people and wounded 53 others in a mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida.
So saint culture greatly changes with the use of this technology as well. The last case study that I'm going to touch on, and we're running out of time, so I'll make sure to go through this quickly, is of a local pardon and parole board in Louisiana being targeted with generative AI technology. Now, this was predominantly a 4chan community as well as a Discord community, and it started as individuals who were tuning into a YouTube live stream of hearings of the Louisiana Pardon and Parole Board. Very quickly, it started just conversations related to the people appearing in court being hot or not, or making bets as to who would get covered jail sentences. But over a period of time, they then started using AI technology to imbue their viewpoints of the world on many of the defendants. And you can imagine how this gamifies, for them, the watching of court hearings and makes it so much more worrisome. What they also did was sexualize many of the women who appeared in front of the courtroom as well, which might make individuals not even want to show. And then the last thing I'm going to show is how they use deepfake technology to create perceptions and distort realities of the particular judges. So go ahead and play the actual audio of Tony Marabella, which is on the laptop. Not that one, that one.
Kathy Rowland Walker and Darlene Williams.
You can imagine a lot of these were
Kathy Rowland Walker
very boring hearings, but through listening to hundreds of hours, and you really don't even need that many hours, they were able to create content like this.
You know what, Pete, I was thinking, we always talk about sending them back to Africa or hanging them high or whatnot. But do you think we'd even have a job without these moon crickets hopping around?
And there were dozens of these audio files, often impersonating defendants, attorneys, the judges themselves. And you can imagine, particularly what this is, in a local area, creating this content, you know, for some poor satirical joke could very quickly become real if it was leaked to a journalist outlet, or even, for whatever reason, ended up impacting any of the individuals that were mocked in some other way.
You know what, Pete?
That's about it. Thanks so much for listening. Looking forward to hearing a lot of your questions related to the stuff that is in the wild.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel, for the excellent overview, particularly on the deep dive of the various types of bots that can be used to spread manipulative information and disinformation and misinformation, and also for the overview on AI audios and how those can also be manipulated for recruitment and propaganda purposes. Next, we'll move to Dr. Ashley Mattheis, and I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just getting our tech set up. So, typically I work on, well, first let me say thank you for having me at this event. It's really interesting. And we're going to shift gears slightly from what you can do with AI to content moderation in AI. Typically I work on gender extremism, as my bio said, but today we're taking a little detour into my more recent work for the Tech Against Terrorism Europe project. And in the report that I'm going to be talking about today, we were exploring how micro, small, and medium-sized platforms can utilize AI in content moderation. And this is with respect to our project, which is both analyzing their uptake of and helping them meet compliance for the new terrorist content online regulation out of the EU, commonly called the TECO, which is part of the larger suite of regulations, including the DSA, the Economic Markets Act, and the new AI Act, which won't go into force until 2028. So initially, the largest companies, large platforms on the web, which the EU refers to as very large online platforms or very large online search engines, VLOPs and VLOSs, had to comply with this. So we're ramping up for these smaller platforms. And what is important to note is that a micro platform can be anywhere between 0 and 9 employees. A small platform can be anywhere between 10 and 24 employees. And then a medium-sized platform runs from about 25 to 249 employees. So the platforms we're talking about, and there are thousands of potential platforms here, have very small amounts of resources and staff, but are dealing with these issues on a very large scale. And within that context, the report focused primarily on hash matching and machine learning categorization. We did not look at sort of predictive and behavioral AI options, just primarily because these platforms couldn't use those. They don't have the resources to use them. Okay, so in terms of identifying prohibited content, part of our report focuses on like just a primer on what is AI in this context, what does that mean, what is available as an opportunity, and how you can use it to source or to surface this type of content, and which type of content you have to source, because what meets the legal definition of terrorist content online. And so that leaves out a lot of other content. We talked about borderline content. We also refer to awful but lawful content in that framework. And so there's a lot of content, particularly I work on sort of far right milieus, in those arenas that do not meet the standard, the legal standard. So it's really important that these small platforms have some idea of how to think through what is legal content that needs to be removed and how they can approach that. So we cover sort of a framework on hash matching. Specifically, we talk about cryptographic hash matching and perceptual hash matching. So cryptographic matching is like the best, the premier one hash, like it's secure, it does all these things, but it doesn't help you match a lot of things, because if there's one pixel of difference in your new image, it will not match. So by and large, the standard is other forms of hash matching, typically a sort of perceptual form, which will match any image that a human eye couldn't tell the difference between, right? But this makes that less secure. And there have been studies that have been done where people have been able to reverse engineer the image from the hash, or they've been able to manipulate the hash to refer to other images, including in one case example, the Coke brand label, like image, to manipulate those systems. So it's important that these platforms and the wider population understand how hash matching works and what can be done and what can't be done. But the fact that these are not entirely secure hashes means that you can't just share hash databases. That will become important later. So you can't just share a hash database because you essentially might be giving terrorists an entire database of content. Okay. The second arena we looked at was classification systems. So this would be your machine learning. You train a model, right, to go find and match content and surface it for you. Thank you. But this has sort of three really large problems. This one is more properly AI than hash matching to begin with, but it requires very large training data sets. And in the context of terrorist content online, it's really difficult to come up with that large of a data set, and certainly not on a single platform, right? You might be able to gather from multiple platforms, but platforms can't do that kind of capture because of privacy issues, particularly in the EU and UK with GDPR. Holding on to those materials can be a problem. There's issues with freedom of expression. There's a lot of things going on there, transparency. So building the training data set for the model is a complicated thing. You would then also have to train the model itself, right? So when you're training the model, that's a very resource and human intensive process. You have to have a human that teaches the computer, then the computer can start to teach itself and create a feedback loop. But it takes time to do that, and it takes resource to do that. And third is bad data in, bad data out, right? Basically, like depending on what data you have. So say you were able to gather a large amount of data about IS, that data is not going to help you with the far right. And within the far right, you have different ideologies. You have some people that do very specific propaganda things. So again, that abrupts your training data set, but it also means that you're going to have a really complicated time doing a variety of ideological work in terms of cleanup. And so machine learning can be very useful, but it requires a lot of intensive setup, and it has some problems for these smaller entities. So with this training data problem, right, there is no sort of source where people can get a preset data set for this. It doesn't exist. And one of the things that we found during the scope of the project is event-based issues are real issues. So the Gaza conflict, right? As we saw with Danny's data, the AI data, no one would have that in their training data set. None of that would be surfaced potentially through an AI system like this because it didn't exist prior to the time the model was trained. And that exists for the war in Ukraine, right? So event-based things are really important in terrorism, right? Think Christchurch attack, think all of those things. And then you also have the issue of sort of users' use of and how to bypass moderation systems where they will alter images. And so you create proliferating data that machines can't classify. So your data set gets a little wonky very quickly. And then you have to continually fine tune. So the training data problem is a very large problem in the field for this specific context for anyone that isn't a huge platform. It may also be for them as well. And then there's other identified issues with algorithms, algorithmic training and machine learning, which you've mentioned as well. So bias is one of them. A lot of the coding can embed bias already in the system. And when you do that, you're going to get false positives, you're going to get biased outputs, so bad data in, bad data out. The evolving tactics of bad actors. So the Christchurch case is a great example. That video went up, people pulled it down, other actors having nothing to do with it, maybe sometimes it was for fun, manipulated the front end of the data system so scrubbers couldn't find it. We've never been able to successfully remove that content from sort of the web sphere, right? And it keeps changing and adapting, and that can become a game for some of these actors. And particularly with the advent of AI, that game gets substantially easier. So how do you keep up with that? Along with that, we have the issue of freedom of expression. Like balancing freedom of expression really matters, and oversight and transparency around that. I think we just had the first few years of data from Meta's oversight board, the Facebook oversight board. And I think we amped up in the last year, but from 17 cases the year before to 47 cases related potentially to terrorism that they took on. So we need more transparency, not less, but that becomes incredibly difficult depending on who's doing the work and how many people they have doing it. And then an over-reliance on AI. We're sold AI content moderation often as a silver bullet solution, as a fully automated solution. It is not. There is no fully automated sort of AI solution to content moderation for this context, right? And we have to think about the fact that AI content moderation is used for many more things that are problematic content than just terrorism and extremism. This is a carved out kind of case that can kind of gum up the works in some ways. And lastly, we have ethical considerations. So what are the ethics of doing this, deploying this? Who is involved? State actors, non-state actors, what does that mean? Who gets their content moderated, who doesn't? This has become another very apparent issue in the Gaza conflict. Whose content gets removed and why? What about journalists? What about people who are speaking against a piece, a terroristic thing? What do we do with that, and how do we know what that is? And again, AI cannot distinguish that sort of contextual difference in ways that are very problematic. So this means that human in the loop or augmented intelligence tends to be the gold standard with which we do this work, but is not unproblematic. And as I'll talk about in a second, requires and necessitates some shifts in what we're doing. So moderators are often not employees of the companies that they're moderating for. They are contracted out, which means that they don't have the same resources, the same sort of salaries, the same sort of protections, the same sort of services that employees might have. This has been widely written about. And looking at these types of materials can radicalize, can harm moderators. So we have a problem with human, if you can even afford to have them, we have a problem with the outcomes of human moderation as it stands today. To wit, the first recommendation in the report deals with human in the loop moderation. It is the best standard we can have. It offers the best solutions, but we need to develop a minimum set, right, of sort of best practices across the industry for how to engage human moderators. And we need to think about how we can use AI itself to create better tools for moderators that can help with their well-being. There's an opportunity there that we haven't leveraged yet. Now, with this group of platforms, there are off-the-shelf solutions for content moderation. Content moderation is becoming industrialized in a variety of ways. And those, again, because of these training data issues, because of periods, because of what they might cover, and because the focus of content moderation is wider than just terrorism, companies have to be very careful about which off-the-shelf solutions they might be going for and what they need to do with respect to being compliant with the law, right? Not every solution would work for that in a variety of ways. We also see collaborative models. Shout out to GiftCT, collaborative models there. But we see collaborative models where companies and platforms are working together in a variety of ways to try and tackle this. GiftCT has a certain set of requirements that they require of platforms that they engage with. Not all platforms meet those standards. Tech Against Terrorism has done substantial work in helping capacity building for other platforms to reach that standard. But then again, some of these entities will never meet those thresholds. So what are collaborative models, or what could they look like for these smaller entities? So here our recommendations is very strong assessment of any off-the-shelf sort of offering and what it can do and if it would be compliant with the TICO or other regulation. They should also make use of potential models for Tech Against Terrorism or GiftCT where applicable, and if not applicable, where could they seek other potential collaborative efforts, right, to help them increase their resource base? Because the name of the game here is resources right now. That is the name of the game and how well we can stand up this. So the circle here in the EU sort of flag stars, that's the VLOPs and VLOSs, or the top tier ones. You can see the scale difference between a 0 to 9 employee company and some of those companies, right? And then this is just a grid of different tools. So the largest companies can make their own tools. Some of them are starting to make those more openly accessible to small platforms, but there's issues there, right? As I said, the hashrang database, you can't just share a hashrang database with anyone, right? There's problems there. So how do we think about better partnerships, better tooling that can be more widely shared? How do we think about different levels of engagement where you can protect the entities who are making the tools, right, from potential manipulation? So our last set of recommendations, right, is how to work together internationally, organizations and governments to support the development of tools that can be openly available and attenuated for these smaller platforms. How to develop good practice guides so that we can have consistent practice across their use for these smaller platforms and so that people with less knowledge can engage them as they're building into their compliance. And then we would like to see the larger companies, people who are already doing collaboration, think about different leveling of collaboration. What could that look like as opposed to full in or out? What would it look like to have a partial connection to help either inform sort of training or knowledge base, if not fully sharing materials. And so that is the scope and scale of what we were looking at. I look forward to sort of any questions you have, and if you have questions about gender propaganda and AI, see me at lunch, I have thoughts.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mattheis, for your excellent overview about how AI works itself. I mean, especially with hash sharing, because I think it's a term we hear a lot, but going behind the mechanics and, as you said, making sure that we understand how it works, it will be helpful for creating, better policies and understanding how we can use hash sharing database to counter extremist content online. Also, you clarified the nuanced and often complex challenges that crop up when dealing with AI and employing AI against extremist content, and also an emphasis on the ethics, on ethical approaches when employing AI, but also paying attention to the human content moderators as well, and taking into considerations how to protect them in this offline space.